back. And today we're joined by our good friends, CIA Jeff, Mad Bomber Mike. So the topic that we're going to be discussing today is this manufactured global food crisis. There really is no global food crisis, but you have the minions of the WEF, World Economic Forum, working in conjunction with their graduates from the Young Global Leaders Program who've infiltrated every Western government to curtail production on the part of farmers across the Western world, create a shortage of food, and then give you bugs. You can eat the bugs. You'll live in a pod. You'll own nothing. You'll be happy. That's straight from Klaus Schwab. But before we get into that, Mike, what's the conflicted question of the day?
Conflicted question of the day. This is out of the Desolation deck. I like this one. All right. And we will talk about our answers at the end of this video. Scenario, an EMP hits. You band together with some local neighbors to look out for each other, but aren't all that close. Your spouse was at work when it hit, and she works 12 miles away. 12 miles is a long ways, especially in hostile territory. You have 3 small children and are having to take care of them, but it has been 2 days and your wife still has not made it home. Do you leave your children with your neighbors and go looking for your spouse, stay with your children and hope your spouse shows up, or take your children with you and go look for your spouse? So the question again is, do you leave your children with your neighbors and go looking for your spouse? Do you stay with your children and hope your spouse shows up, or take your children with you and go look for your spouse? We'll discuss this at the end of this video.
That's a brutal scenario.
Yeah.
I kind of suspect that you make this shit up as you go, Mike, but just because you have a track record of doing stuff like that. So let's jump right in, and we're going to go to the WEF's website. And the reason we're doing that is because this is an article that Jeff sent me earlier that lays out the plan from the World Economic Forum. And essentially it boils down to what I already mentioned. They're going to shut down farmers from producing food. People will be hungry, and therefore you'll eat the bugs. Jeff, do you want to expand on this article?
The article, it basically tries to tell you why it's good to eat bugs, but it puts it all in context of global warming and carbon and all this nonsense saying, insects produce fewer greenhouse gases per kilogram of live weight than what you're seeing right now. And this data is probably true, but in my opinion, I don't care. I don't want to eat bugs. But the whole premise is to substitute proteins and to take cows and pigs out of the mix because they put off methane and everything else, all these evil noxious gases apparently. But having lived on a farm for a while, I seem to have survived breathing the air. But yeah, the whole point, I think, is to force people into new forms of protein that are either totally manufactured, like grown in a lab, derived from insects, and all in the name of climate change. Total nonsense.
So, Jeff, I'd like to ask you how you feel making statements like that, like a capitalist pig, that it's you don't want to eat the bugs. And that's a very capitalist thing to say.
It's also a very libertarian thing to say. I look at, you want to eat bugs? Knock yourself out. Just don't force me to eat bugs. I won't force you to eat a steak, and don't force me to eat bugs.
We'll do the same thing as the last video. We'll collect up all the links. We'll put a link in the description below to click through to our website, and we'll have all of the links to everything that we're going to show today. And this is Klaus Schwab's market that he's working on expanding franchises throughout Europe, coming to America soon enough. So these are all the things that are going to be on the Klaus Schwab WEF menu for people who refuse to go along with his plan. This is what he's got in store for us. So I've got a bunch of tabs open on X, and there's a number of reasons that I go to X for this stuff that I haven't really shared with our audience. Whether you like Elon Musk or not, he's put his money where his mouth is as far as restoring free speech is concerned. There is a ton of legit information every day posted to X that would never make it past the censorship on any other big tech platform. Not to mention the fact that stuff happens on X long before it reaches any other social media, long before it reaches the mainstream media. So if there was a situation like you just described, Mike, let's say it wasn't an EMP, but it was some sort of SHTF event, following stuff on X would give you a leg up most likely over the average person. So this particular individual, and I'm not going to play the videos, I'm just going to give a brief overview. This is one of Klaus Schwab's lieutenants from the WEF explaining their plan for the world, which my question always is, who elected these assholes? And that includes this asshole, head of the World Health Organization, spewing the same garbage as the WEF, and then an even bigger asshole, Bill Gates. So who elected these people? We didn't elect these people to make choices for us. So again, each of these videos, the link down below, head to our website. You can watch them on there. The rest of the articles, posts on X that I brought up here have videos of showing what's going on in Europe as far as farmer protests are concerned. So they're well underway of this manufactured food crisis of trying to shut down farmers in multiple different ways, egregious taxes on fuel, potentially taking land by using eminent domain. Jeff, actually, you brought the topic up of the amount of land that's federally owned versus privately owned, and the Obama/Biden admin's goal of co-opting farmland. What were the numbers on that again?
Well, I think the total in the United States is 17% of the land is owned by the federal government, and the vast majority of that is out here in the West. I'm in Arizona, and I've got the Coronado National Forest. I can basically throw a rock and hit it from here, and the state owns millions of acres as well. But what they want to do, and what Biden has said, and he has a plan, it's called 30 by 30, where they want to put 30% of U.S. land into some sort of like ecological preserve status where it's not being farmed, maybe you're not raising, you're not grazing cattle on it. And to meet that goal, they would obviously have to take a lot of private land or induce people to pay people to put their land in some ecological preserve program or something like that. But in a lot of states, especially in the Midwest, it's all farmland. So you're going to take productive farmland out of production. Theory that, okay, we're going to have buffalo roaming again through Nebraska? Don't think so. You're reducing our ability to grow food for some nebulous environmental goal, which is not really clearly defined. It doesn't say what they hope to achieve by putting 30% of the land in preserve status, other than put 30% of the land in preserve status.
Well, I think they see it as another lever that they can pull to reduce food production, which in turn forces people to eat the bugs. Mike does the accent better than I do.
You shall eat the bugs and be happy. I'm getting a monocle. I'm going to wear a monocle every time we do this from now on.
And I will bet $50 right now that somebody's going to make a comment down below that you blew their earbuds out of their earbuds with that Klaus Schwab impersonation that you just did. Suffice it to say, I guess the end goal beyond just forcing people to own nothing and live in cubicles and eat the bugs is to actually depopulate the earth. And that whether it's Gates, Tedros, Klaus Schwab, if you follow them and if you listen to what they have to say and read their websites, they make no bones over the subject that they want to reduce the global population because in their mind, if they don't do that, humanity will be lost. It'll be certain fate for us. So the rest of these tabs I have open here, like I said, they're primarily related to what's going on in Germany because the German government has really been on the offensive farmers. But Jeff, as you pointed out offline, that started in other countries. Where was the first country again that it started, Jeff?
The French do it periodically over the EU regs on teas and things like that, but it wasn't so much of a nationwide thing. I think where it really started was the Netherlands because they were going to take like 5,000 farms and seize them and then turn them fallow so they wouldn't be productive. And that led to the farmers' revolt, the rise of the farmer-centric political party, which then recently elected Geert Wilders, I think, can't even remember his last name for sure, how to pronounce it. And they're in the process of trying to form a new government now because they kicked out the old president, Rutte. He got bounced. So they're on the verge of essentially taking over the government of the Netherlands and hopefully flying the one finger salute to the EU.
This subject's very germane to the last video that we did, where we essentially connected the dots for a bunch of people. If you want to know what's coming to America, just look to other Western countries, especially Europe. And that's where they come up with the recipe before they bring it over here. And like I said in the last video, try to ram it down our throats. Here's another post. This is with regards to Germany, as well as other countries. Like I said, I'm not going to play all of these videos. They'll be linked down below. A lot of this stuff is German related. You could spend a very little amount of time on X and find way more examples than what I have up here. These are just some of the most egregious things. If you look at the size of these protests, they're ginormous on behalf of the farmers. This is a story from Great Britain that's on the same topic. This is a story mentions France, as you just did, Jeff, and Holland. And this is from a Canadian perspective. Compared this to the trucker convoy a couple years ago, which Trudeau's Gestapo shut down and seized people's bank accounts. Another good example of what these globalists want to do here, which, by the way, Justin Trudeau is a graduate of Klaus Schwab's WEF Young Global Leaders program, so fully indoctrinated. But the last one that's on here, there does seem to be some glimmer of hope because people are standing up for themselves, which Mike had pointed out previously as well. If you want to be left alone, but you don't stand up for yourself, you get steamrolled. There are actually some additional videos that we don't have on here from Klaus Schwab recently speaking, how he's basically pissed off at libertarians slowing down his process to have one world government and all the things that we've already mentioned.
How dare we?
Obviously, we're all libertarians, lowercase l, but in Klaus Schwab's book, his definition of being a libertarian is not the same as ours. He sees libertarians as the bad guys. In reality, he's the bad guy, right? This episode of SDN is brought to you by Switch It Up, your national grid down service provider. Get a quote on a solar PV system with battery backup at switchitupinc.com or click the link in the video description below. Moving on from there, Jeff, you talked about Klaus Schwab last time, but there's more information to his background that we want to share with our audience. And Mike, chime in on this as well. It's pretty crazy stuff. But Jeff, you go first.
Okay, well, for people who don't know, Klaus Schwab is Swiss, but Swiss German. And his father, basically a Nazi. His father they were in Switzerland, and then they moved to Germany in 1938, or right at the beginning of the war, where his father he was the director of a company called Eicher Weiss AG, an industrial contractor for the Nazis. And what this company did, among other things, it made munitions and flamethrowers and stuff like that. But one of the things it was involved with, it made turbines that were used in the production of heavy water for the Nazis' nuclear bomb effort. As we all know, they never succeeded in producing a bomb, but they made the turbines that Norsk Hydro, which is, you ever saw the movie Heroes of the Telemark, that's what that was about.
Yeah, so he was part of the Norway crew.
Yes, his company made those turbines that made the heavy water that the Germans stole from the Norwegians in order to make enriched uranium. Or actually, that would have been a plutonium device if you're using heavy water. But they were trying to make plutonium. That's Klaus Schwab's dad. Now, his dad was a wealthy man. He escaped any kind of culpability for what he did during the war because he was Swiss. And then when he died, Klaus inherited, I think it was around $20 million, which he then used to start the predecessor of the WEF. And Klaus never worked in industries, never held a real job. He was a college professor. And then he started the WEF, and then he lives off of donations from other people. So this guy who's talking about this is how we should run the world hasn't run a barbershop.
Before we move to Mike, there was a comment on our last video, no links, no data, no proof, but basically, and there's a reason I'm asking you this, the accusation is that the World Economic Forum was actually started by the CIA, and then Klaus Schwab was handpicked. And I figured that would be your reaction, but maybe verbalize your thoughts on that, since you were in the CIA for 26 years.
Well, if they did, it's news to me. Now, there's things that obviously went on that I wasn't privy to. There's compartmentation and all, but I had not heard that one. You got me laughing, made me cough.
Well,
I had not heard that
one. Dude, it's laughable. I love the company. Okay, you guys do some things really, really good, but honestly, probably one of the best descriptions I've ever heard was the Joker in one of the Dark Knight movies, when he said, "Do I look like a guy with a plan? I'm just a dog chasing a car." That summed up the CIA for me perfectly.
The CIA does whatever the administration tells them to do for the most part. But we did do some things well. When we got into trouble, it was when we overreached and started going beyond your mission. And that's not what we're here for. So why are we doing this? And invariably that blows up. It's hubris. You do one thing, you think you did it right. Well, we can do anything. Guess what? No, you can't. And
the bad pig says false.
So what you're saying is the CIA is not in bed with Klaus Schwab and did not start the World Economic Forum. We have an anonymous troll / keyboard warrior who does not agree with that.
Well, I can say honestly, I don't know 100%, but we don't have that good of a track record of being Dr. Evil. The famous line I always use is the only way 3 people can keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead.
There you go.
How very
that would require so many people to know what's going on. Did somebody go talk to him at some point? Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Did someone meet him at a conference? I've met senior Iranian officials. It didn't mean I was telling them what to do. I just ran into him at a conference.
In case you haven't noticed, Jeff, the comment section for all of our videos, especially Survival Dispatch News, is lit.
It's a good time, man. You need to get into there, mix it up.
Absolutely. Okay, Mike,
dive in.
Let's get your thoughts on this manufactured food crisis and what we can do, because you're very active as far as growing your own food, storing it, and I'd like to get your perspective, number 1, on everything we've covered up until now, and number 2, your recommendations for the average person.
Looking at this from a global standpoint, we're looking at and I checked a bunch of the agro intelligence sites, and it looks like we're coming out of a 15-year low as far as agriculture is concerned, globally speaking. Now, last year, India restricted a ban on all grains.
Mm-hmm. And rice,
all grains, period. They are, up until that point, they were one of the largest exporters of food in the world, which, having grown up in the 70s and 80s, that's weird. That was just kind of a weird thing for me to see when growing up. There's kids starving in India, and now here we are. They're all over the place. They're producing huge quantities of food. They stopped that last year. One of the things was because they're having a lot of problems with a lot of Southeast Asian countries, as well as then you've also got a big problem with the Russian-Ukraine war. And Russia and Ukraine are actually the second and third largest grain exporters in the world after India. And now neither of them, well, they're both having big problems getting their grain out of their ports because something about a shooting war. Weird. Anti-ship missiles, submarines, crap like that. Now, how much is that going to affect the United States, right? Okay, here in the U.S. and also in a lot of Western Europe, it really doesn't affect us other than prices going up. Is anybody going to wind up actually starving here in the West? Probably not. Are you going to wind up having a problem with acquiring food that you want, right? Okay, you may not get everything that you want. All the brands that you want are not necessarily going to be on the shelf. All that being said, we just started a El Nino condition in the Southern Hemisphere. And now we are looking at, in the United States, we're looking at the Palouse region, which is Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, Northern Idaho. That is one of the highest grain producing portions of our country. That is looking at a 15-year high for production. And that started last year. They already had a huge improvement, but better than 2019 and 2016 combined. So we're looking at big improvements over the La Nina time period. Argentina and Australia looking at major bumper crops. So the Southern Hemisphere looking at huge bumper crops. And then you also have to look at the improved political environment in Argentina on top of that, which is going to lend itself not only to better production, but also the ability for exporting. So, and then you're looking at, of course, Russia and Ukraine. They're also going to have bumper crops. Getting it out of the country, well, that's a little bit of a problem, but they'll do what they got to do as far as that goes. Now, China is a major importer of food because they've been looking at a series of droughts for a very long time. However, their breadbasket area all of a sudden got a whole bunch of rain last fall, more so than they were expecting. So it virtually destroyed the majority of the crops that they did have. So they're going to be really looking forward to a whole lot of imports again, but they're coming out of that drought because of all this rain. I would be willing to bet you're going to wind up with some famine there in China. But as far as grain outlook goes, there is a major underperformance in grain right now. But I would say that you're probably going to be looking at an increase in 2024 of grain production worldwide. Now, that does not necessarily gel with what we're seeing coming from the WEF. So again, we look at hard data on the ground, and then we compare it to what they're saying, and the two don't match. The two don't match at all. All right. So I see, just like you said, I see this as manufacturing. All right. They're saying, oh, this is going to happen. I don't think anything about agriculture, guys. This is not rocket surgery. So now, here in America, in the preparedness world, right? Or in Europe, we've got listeners in Europe. We've got listeners in Australia. Grow your own damn food. Now, I know a lot of people, they're like, oh, I got my seed vault, I'm good.
Right.
and how often do I scream? And as a matter of fact, there was a Bear Independent just did a huge rant. Possession does not equate to proficiency. Okay. Big rant on that. And if you've never gardened before, and I keep a garden much of the year here in the Tennessee River Valley, and I'm able to, I'm blessed to be able to do that here. If you've never actually gardened, you haven't made your mistakes. Yeah. And I'm here to tell you, if you're not making those mistakes now, when I can just go down and I can buy another 17-cent pack of seeds because I screwed up, man, you're messing up. You need to be growing that stuff now. The more of that you're growing now, the more independent you're making yourself from this system that the WEF is talking about, right? And everybody's like, oh, but I got to have wheat and I got to do. No, you don't. You can grow a lot of those proteins yourself, right? Like one of the things that I stock, and now I'm getting ready to start growing this year, is lentils. So very many people don't know a damn thing about lentils, and as a matter of fact, it's one of the most underutilized grains in the world. Nobody knows how to cook with lentils outside of pretty much the Mediterranean. Of course, I didn't know anything about it until I started spending a lot of time in the Middle East. I love lentils now, and my lentils, they're cheap. I can stock a huge quantity of them, and they got a great shelf life. It's not a wheat shelf life. 10-year shelf life is good, but stock what you use and use what you stock. I not only use it in my cooking because it's got great fiber and it has an outstanding protein count in and of itself. During the winter, I also sprout my lentils, and I use that as good green fodder because they need greens year round as well, right? And am I relying upon a store for that? No. I'm growing those greens myself right here, right? And I provide those to my chickens, so then I keep their health up throughout the year, and I can actually have a little bit of egg production even in the wintertime. The more self-sufficient that you make yourself, the better off. Now, I understand a lot of people live in apartments and duplexes and stuff like that. What you can have a little garden on, you've got your, God help you if you're north facing, but if you've got a south facing little walkway outside of your apartment, go ahead, have a little container garden out there. How difficult is it to grow some peppers and some tomatoes and stuff like that? You can grow a whole lot of stuff in a very small area. You've just got to be a little bit more smart about what you're doing. The better self-sufficiency you have, the less you are beholden to the system that's around you. I'm not looking at things collapsing boop overnight or anything like that. But if you start looking at shortages, if you're providing yourself with fresh veg, even a small quantity, grow zucchini for God's sakes, right? Zucchini and squash, man, they're super ridiculously easy to grow. But you've got to grow the stuff that's right for your area. How do you figure out what's right for your area? Well, of course, you talk to fellow gardeners, but you make your mistakes. And like I do a lot of heirloom stuff that is native to the Southeast. So I'm not bringing in all kinds of crazy GMO stuff that winds up getting killed right away by all the fungus, because there's a huge quantity of fungus in the South. I didn't realize how big of an issue that was. Fungus and bugs will just wreck a crop like that. But man, I'll tell you what, now I've learned my lessons. I know what to grow.
Speak a little bit more, please, on the topic of heirloom seeds versus non-heirloom seeds that are typically genetically modified and carry all sorts of bad characteristics.
Well, so there's a place for GenMod, right? There is a place for GenMod. and there's a place not for gen mod. Okay, like I said, I grow a lot of grow a lot of heirloom squash and corn that is native to the Southeast, right? And it's got hundreds of generations of building up resistance to the fungus and the bugs. Gotcha. Around here. But then at the same time, I also do grow some GMOs as companions to those, right? Because there are some nasty little bugs that I still wind up with here, right? But if I grow a certain GMO that particular bug hates right next to it, then it protects both of them. I do a lot of companion planting. Companion planting is a very big thing. So they're working off of each other. You've just got to be picky about what gen mods you use. And I'm not going for bulk grow or anything like that. So I don't have to go with any of the real big crazy stuff. And that's where you wind up with a lot of nasty stuff. And a lot of the gen mod stuff requires a lot of pesticides and it requires a lot of fertilizer. And that's one of the things that I don't want to be tied to that. I grow my own soil here, right? I build my own compost and my own soil because of course I'm on top of a mountain where the soil is terrible. So I have to grow my own, right? So I build my own soil. So I'm not beholden to somebody who's manufacturing pesticides. And I'm companion planting. So I grow my own soil. So I'm not beholden to somebody who makes fertilizer. And I grow companion planting. So I'm not beholden to somebody who produces pesticide. Okay. There's good natural ways to do these things. You just got to be smarter about it. You got to put a little bit of brain power into it now and be working on this in the long term. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. I guarantee you.
It's a process, not an event.
Exactly.
Jeff, did you catch any of what Mike was just saying? You're on mute.
I heard all that. I was just barely off camera for a quick second. And it also, a lot of it depends on where you live. I live in the desert. So what people do here is a lot of container growing. And you can't, like where I live, I can't put anything outside the wall, outside the fence. Deer, javelina, all the desert wildlife, it looks at it as a smorgasbord. So you've got to do it behind a fence.
Yep.
And the soil here may not be that great, so you do it in containers. But like Mike, what we do here is we build our own soil. Anytime I clean up my land, I mulch everything. And I've got a huge compost heap. And you let that stuff, just let it rot. And at the bottom, you end up with good soil. And it also returns the nutrients that those original plants had taken out of the soil and put it in there. Another thing I do is I don't throw away my ashes from my fireplace because ashes are just the minerals from the trees. I spread that out, especially if I know it's going to rain. I spread out. Don't put too much in one place because it's basically lye and it'll kill anything around it. But you spread that out over where you're going to be planting or where you're going to be growing it. It fortifies the soil. It's just returning all those nutrients back to the soil.
But you got to be careful with that, depending on your soil consistency to begin with. See,
True.
you're in a very lime poor environment.
Yes.
My area here, we're on top of limestone.
No, yeah,
I can't use it here.
Okay, well, I use it here because in the desert the soil is sandy and it doesn't have a lot of nutrients.
Right. And granted, I go out of my way with a neighbor of mine, and we go to a horse ranch twice a year, and we get an entire trailer full of 1-year-old horse manure, and we throw it in, and it gets mixed in with all my chicken, all my waste from my chickens and everything like that, and we make good soil here intentionally.
I try to use cow manure over horse because the way a horse's digestive system works, it's a one pass. So if they're eating anything with Bermuda or anything like that, all the seeds go right through. And that horse manure might as well be a bag of Bermuda seed.
Well, and that's why I cook it for an additional year after I get it.
Yeah. And cows, because they chew cud and they regurgitate, very little of it actually survives their digestive system.
Right. Now, the other thing is because we mix in all of our chicken manure, it gets way hotter and kills all those seeds because of the massive quantities of nitrogen from avian poop.
I don't have chickens. They would be coyote food.
Right. If you didn't get the memo from Klaus Schwab, no nitrogen production.
No,
doesn't matter that 57% of our atmosphere, according to the CIA guy, is nitrogen. It's against the rules. You can't do that.
Now, this is not a question of feeding people. This is a question of control. That's all this is. This is control.
Yeah, well said.
Well, and when you look at, okay, one of the first countries that they kind of targeted for under the guise of nitrogen is bad for the environment, although everywhere else in the world you're trying to add nitrogen to your soil so your plants grow, they went after the Netherlands. Well, the Netherlands, even though it's a tiny country, second largest food exporter on the planet. Little Netherlands. Who's the biggest? We are. But if you look at, I pulled up it was a thing from Pew Research about projected population growth, and that by 2100, they expect the Earth to be at zero population growth. But where it is going to grow is Africa. It's still growing there. That's where you're going to see most of the growth. North America, Europe, South America, and pretty much leveling off in those areas. So if you stop countries that export food, or you dial back their food production, they're not going to starve themselves. So who ends up starving?
The third world.
Africa, Pakistan. You look at Bangladesh. You look at China. China has enough money; they can buy what they want. But those other countries, they're going to starve.
Well,
Pakistan only has the Indus River Valley that's really fertile and productive,
and it's grossly polluted now.
It's grossly polluted. But if you go to Google Earth, look at the Indus River Valley, and you will see all these green fields, and then they just stop. They have a very nice irrigation system that the British built for them. But if it weren't for that, they'd all be starved to death.
Well, and that's what it's always been, is you look at a lot of these countries and you're like, without outside aid, you will all starve to death. I spent enough time in East Africa to definitely see that. Kenya essentially feeds all of East Africa for the most part.
The Horn of Africa, those guys would not last.
No.
And yet they keep having children, because their culture is the more children you have, the more people you have to look after yourself once you're no longer capable of producing anything or working, right? Then in the West, the argument is that if we don't keep our population growing, then our economy can't expand. And if our economy doesn't expand, then we can't meet our financial obligations to pay things like retirement funds and other bills. And the WEF likes to discuss their Great Reset. What their vision of the Great Reset is not very palatable especially to Americans. I personally believe that a Great Reset will happen at some point in time. Our dollar's worth nothing. It's not worth the paper it's printed on anymore. The whole system's going to come crashing down at some point in time, whether it's imminent,
whether it's intentional or not, it's going to happen.
Correct.
Weimar Republic.
Yeah, exactly. So while you guys were talking, I wrote down just a handful of random notes in no particular order, but I'll reiterate something that I say frequently. Put whatever you can out of your disposable income into food now, not later. You should have started this stuff yesterday, but if you haven't, try put your money into that, especially with inflation, food inflation somewhere around 30%.
Real quick on that. Price of all goods is getting ready to go up just because of the cost of shipping, due to the issues going on in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden right now. So not all shipping companies, but a lot of shipping companies are having to go add an additional 3,500 miles onto their shipping. Instead of going through the Suez Canal, they're having to go all the way around Africa.
Yeah, and there's another side to that. That's a 100% legitimate comment on your part, but there are also the greedy bad actors out there who will use a situation like the Red Sea to crank the prices up even further. It's our costs are going up in the Red Sea and for shipping, therefore we need to increase them. Let me give you a great example of a piece of news that I listened to this morning. So we had this storm come across the entire country a couple days ago. There's supposedly a polar vortex coming next week. But on this morning's mainstream media news, as a result of this one storm 2 days ago, it's going to cause a shortage of beef across the entire country. One storm. Yep.
We've already been in a beef shortage situation, primarily because of problems with packing companies.
According to the mainstream media, Storm Finn, I believe it was called, did so much damage across the upper Midwest that we now have an imminent beef crisis. That's the kind of BS that the mainstream media likes to push down people's throats.
I think anybody that's listening to the mainstream media these days has already taken that appropriate pill.
Well, as a wise man once said, if you think you hate journalists enough.
Just minor quibble there, Mike. I think it's a great idea to listen to mainstream media, because then you understand what their position is, right? Their belief is, if we keep telling the same lies over and over again, it's kind of like a theme of Obama's, right? We just keep lying over and over again to the point where people actually believe their own bullshit, sort of thing.
That's true.
but watching mainstream media and buying into that, there's no excuse for that in this day and age.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree with that.
Those people are low information, low IQ. I don't know what you want to call them, but they're low information and low IQ.
They're too lazy to do their own research.
There you go. That's it. So some other things, and again, these are just points that I made while y'all were discussing the topics. They're not in any particular order. Another thing is to get out and vote, even though our election system is in bad condition, but push your reps for paper ballots, no mail-in except active duty military abroad, same day results, no machines, and volunteer to be an election observer. And if they try to pull the same shenanigans they did in 2020, where they put up all kinds of barriers to the election observers, don't stand for it. Mike, you mentioned something with regards of Ukraine and Russia being large producers of grains, but getting that stuff out of the country is a challenge, right? So it's just ironic timing. 2 months ago, I got an email from the owner of this company in the Ukraine, BPS Knives, and he asked if we'd be willing to have a look at some of his products. Sure, no problem. This was 2 months ago. His knives just arrived. They just arrived in yesterday's mail. They're typically bushcraft knives, but 2 months to get something from Ukraine here, that's a long time. So there was that.
Because everything that comes out of there is either going to go into Poland, or was it Hungary? I think it is at this point. Well, one of the other Eastern European republics, maybe Romania. Moldova has still got their border closed. But it's not easy. I'm still pursuing contracts over there, and trying to do anything is a nightmare.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, going through other countries. When they sent me the tracking for it, I've been following it almost on a daily basis for a couple months because I wanted to see where it went. When it cleared export at Ukrainian customs, it just said cleared export Ukrainian customs. Nothing showed up on the tracking whatsoever until it hit Sanford, which is this side of Orlando. But wherever it went in between there for the past couple months, no idea whatsoever. A couple other comments that I made. So freeze dryers are expensive, and you can buy like a Harvest right for $4,000 ish sort of thing. We're not in the business of hurting other people's businesses, but I can tell you it's a very low quality product compared to other products that are only a little bit more. The drain pipe's not attached at the back. The seal doesn't work around the door without buying a third-party kit to shim it out. You end up with a very small gap. My wife has battled this thing for a couple of years. She had to buy a bunch of aftermarket parts to get it to go. There's no leveling feet, so you can't tip it towards the back to get the water to drain out. She has a laundry list of things that she's had to correct in it. That being said, if you can't afford to buy a freeze dryer, maybe you can amongst friends, family. And here's a tip that my wife picked up on, and it's cut the time down tremendously. Take whatever you're going to put in the freeze dryer and stick it in your freezer for a couple days first. That will cut down the load on the freeze dryer tremendously. So you're looking at, instead of say 12 to 18 hours to freeze something in a freeze dryer, it's a matter of minutes, and it goes right into the drying cycle, and you can have the stuff done in the same day, sort of thing. So
but even if you can't get to, even if you can't drop the coin for a freeze dryer, get a dehydrator. That's what I do with a lot of stuff. And I just for Christmas, I'm just like super giggly. I can't wait for it. I just got a dehydrator that will go hot enough that now I can dehydrate eggs.
My wife is freeze drying eggs right this minute. That's too ironic.
But I want to be able to dehydrate them into an appropriate powder. Now is it good? Is it great? No, it's not. But you know what? It is a way to process this stuff in an addition. So if you've got a garden and 90% of the stuff out there, you just dehydrate. And it's not a huge stretch to be able to do that. And it's not all that expensive either.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the new ovens, electric ovens, have dehydrator modes. So you go to the panel, and I was making my own jerky because I like to go hiking with my dogs, and I always take jerky, protein boost. They have their own dehydrator. So I get a London broil, slice it thin, and let it marinate overnight, and whatever I want it to marinate in, lay it on there and dehydrate it.
Yeah, one of the things that I looked at one of those, and a lot of them won't go below 170 degrees. So you can do meats just fine, but you can't do vegetables very well because you actually wind up destroying a lot of the minerals and everything in the vegetables because you're not supposed to go above 145.
Okay, I don't remember what mine was. I was using it for meat, but it had temperature settings, and you could pick. But it was a GE, and it was all electronic and everything.
Yeah, I looked at them. So many of them just won't go below 170.
So
I'll have to check on that.
Not a big secret that it's very humid here in Florida. We're the mold
Really?
capital of the world because of the humidity.
What?
I can tell you that when my wife is freeze drying various things, it's a mad rush when it's finished to get it out, vacuum seal it. Then she has a whole process. So she vacuum seals it. Then she puts it in a Mylar bag with an O2 absorber, and then she triple heat seals the Mylar bags. It's not uncommon for those heat seals to not hold. So
She and I need to talk.
and by all means, go ahead. Point really being is that you get a long shelf life if you do it properly, 20, 25, even 30 years. And then, Mike, you mentioned people who live in apartments, and it reminded me that there was a farmer who used to come to the farmer's market here. We live in small town USA, and he always had this huge selection of stuff, and he was a decent guy. And I asked him one time, I said, man, like, you must have like a huge farm. He said, no, I have an acre. I said, what do you mean you have an acre? He says, I grow everything vertically.
Yep.
And he said, so I have an acre where my house and garage and everything's on it. And I have a corner over there. And I can't remember how many layers he said he stacked up in his greenhouse, but he had the equivalent of 7 acres of growing space.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I do with like my greens and lettuce now is I grow all that vertical. Same with my squash. My squash grows up on a trellis up and over the rest of my my stuff, and anything that needs shade is already shaded by the squash.
Where I was going with it, I've actually heard of people growing stuff hydroponically in their apartment and stacking it up. And we've had a couple companies send those sorts of equipment to us.
I love it.
We didn't have any use for it because we have lots of room, but suffice it to say that there are creative solutions, even if you are stuck in an apartment or a dense urban center. And I think that's it as far as the notes that I'd written down while y'all were talking. Is there anything else you guys would like to add as far as Klaus Schwab's plan to make you, say it again, Mike, eat?
You will eat the bugs, and you will live in the pod, and you will be happy doing it. Get in the car.
And you'll own nothing.
Get on the train.
That's funny, but not funny.
Yeah.
And probably only people our generation and older got that.
Yeah.
But
fabricated. Thumbs down. Fabricated.
Right on. Jeff, you got anything further you want to add? Or are we going to the conflicted question?
You guys are know more about the growing stuff than I do, just because I'm in a desert and kind of hard to grow stuff when you got to fight Mother Nature who's trying to eat it as fast as it grows. But I agree that I think a lot of any food shortages are manufactured. The earth we're producing more food now than we ever have in the history of mankind. And if you look, starvation and deprivation is at all-time lows as far as the Earth's population goes. Now, there are pockets here and there, but for the most part, people can get food. So what's the push behind stopping the production of food? It makes no sense. You would want people to have plenty of food. And at the same time, they want to import millions of people from around the world in the United States because we have labor shortage. We don't have enough people. Well, now what is it? Are we overpopulated or do we not have enough people? We need to make up our minds on this.
Jeff, refresh my memory. Was it you or somebody else who said you've got these globalists and progressives, whatever you want to call them, saying that we need to bring people in from the third world to do these menial jobs, but all of the menial jobs are being replaced by automation? The first employee-free McDonald's just opened last week. There's not a person in the entire building.
And they still ask for a tip.
That's another one. But that's a good point. And that was my thing. It's like, all right, do we not have enough people to do the jobs? Or are the jobs all going away because of automation and AI? Where they're saying everybody's going to have this universal basic income to stay alive because there aren't going to be more jobs because AI is going to do it all.
Right.
Well, okay, again, make up your mind. Which is it?
Yeah,
no jobs or too many jobs?
It comes down to the cornerstone of questioning. I'm going to question somebody. If you can't get your story straight, I know now that you're lying. All you got to do is deviate from one point, and now I know.
Or when the response to your question is, you must be a racist.
But
it's like,
that's such a watered down claim anymore, right?
But like I told you the other day, I am a racist. I don't want these Martians coming here taking our jobs.
Before you joined us, Mike, Jeff and I had a offline conversation, and we both lamented the fact that our educational system, whether it be K through 8, high school, college, university, somewhere along the line, we started teaching students to memorize and regurgitate instead of actual problem solving. And Jeff had a great example of somebody who was pontificating what was going on in Afghanistan, and he had just come home 48 hours earlier, and everything that this faculty member had to say, complete and utter bullshit. And she wanted to know how Jeff knew these things. He says, well, I just got back about 48 hours ago.
Yeah, she was asking me, she was saying, oh, the Afghans hate us and want us to leave. And I said, well, actually, no, their biggest fear is that we're going to invade Iraq and we'll forget all about them. And she was like, who told you that? I go, well, where? Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan.
And
hello.
when was this? I go, Tuesday. I said, I just got back from there. Their biggest fear is we're going to leave. And she was just dumbfounded because she was regurgitating what all her liberal professors had driven into her head.
This all sounds so very familiar to me.
It does, doesn't it? The science is settled. We can't discuss this anymore because the science is settled. Science is never settled.
So I have an example of what you're describing, Jeff, that has nothing to do with today's subject, but I got to throw it out there before we do the conflict of channel. There's a recording that was made public yesterday between a pilot who has had his commercial pilot's license for 15 years and an air traffic controller, and he asked for a short landing. And this air traffic controller got into a big argument with him over what he specifically wanted and what the protocol was and how he needed to operate the plane to land at her airport. And he was very copacetic. And what it came down to is she said, well, I Googled it and this is what it said to do. But she was arguing with a 50-year commercial pilot. He laughed. He was like, okay, whatever. I Googled it, therefore, and that's a big problem with this younger generation. To take Google away from them. They're stopped.
Whatever, lady, I'm going to land anyway. You should probably get your fire trucks out.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Conflicted question of the day. Hit us with it again, Mike.
All right. Conflicted question of the day is from the Desolation Pack. All right. An EMP hits. You band together with some local neighbors to look out for each other, but aren't all that close. Your spouse was at work when it hit, and she works 12 miles away. You have 3 small children and are having to take care of them, but it has been 2 days since your wife still has not made it home. Leave your children with your neighbors and go looking for your spouse. Do you stay with your children and hope your spouse shows up, or do you take your children with you and go look for your spouse?
If I'm still writing my answer down, you get to go.
Yeah, okay.
And I will quote one of my former instructors who is British and say, well, if it was easy, anyone would be doing it. And then what would become of us?
I would almost kind of do a modification of that and say, well, it depends also, do I have a vehicle available that works, or am I setting out on foot?
Look, man, you got what you got.
I know. If I have a vehicle, big enough vehicle, I might take my kids with me, but also maybe ask one of the other people if they could come with me as well. So there's 2 adults, 3 kids, and hopefully 2 guys with triggers. I'm not keen on leaving my children with strangers, but I do want to go find my wife. So I think I would, if I'm on foot, I may leave the kids because they're not going to help me find my wife. They're just going to be a drag. If I have transportation, I may take my kids and ask if one of the other people can come with me and put 2 adults in the vehicle.
Clarification, Mike. Are the rest of the people strangers? I didn't catch that part, but I just heard Jeff say that. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry. They're neighbors and you're banded together, but you're not that close. So they're not strangers, but they are your neighbor.
Okay. Does it say how old the kids are by any chance?
They're young.
Okay.
3 small children.
Yeah, that's a tough one. We have plans, my wife and I, if we're separated and the world flips upside down. So I'm fond of my Mad Max e-bike, bug out bike, which we would have protected by EMP shield, because we have a video coming up on that where we hit an EMP shield with 100,000 volts and everything on the network survived. I would probably strike out on my own first on my Mad Max bug out bike, head to the rendezvous point first, and then her work second. I wouldn't leave my wife out there.
My answer on this is going to be different from you guys. My primary responsibility is the family that I have in hand. And I feel that my children are going to be better off at least with one parent, right? My wife and I, we've worked a lot of this stuff out. She's a big girl. She's well prepared to be able to perform an escape and evasion. I'm not going to do her any good wandering through the wilderness between here and there, calling her name, yelling through the forest, Hansel, Gretel, okay, possibly getting myself killed. Now my children have no parent. For me, I'm staying home and I'm going to hold things together there.
Fair enough. That's why I specifically said the rendezvous point and then her work. So I'm not wandering around, on top of which the Mad Max bug out bike has got seating for 2. So my whole thought process is get to the rendezvous, get to her work as fast as possible, rescue my wife and get back as fast as possible as well. And she's pretty accomplished when it comes to marksmanship.
Yeah, my family's not in need of rescue most of the time.
All right. Well, I guess that's it until next week and whatever calamity is underway at that point in time.
2024 is just going to get spicy, kids.
I have a feeling there will be no shortage of content for survival dispatch news in 2024.
It's not going to be boring.
Agreed.
As long as the internet doesn't get nuked.
Right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Be safe out there, everybody.
This video is sponsored by William Tell Archery Supplies, home of the Mini Striker crossbow. Click the link in the description below to learn more.